This episode of the Managing Madrid podcast is brought to you by DoubleTree by Hilton Hotel Chicago Magnificent Mile. Tucked between Magnificent Mile shopping and Navy Pier attractions, their location makes exploring Chicago easy. A 10-minute walk from 360 Chicago, Millennium Park, and the Chicago Riverwalk for dining and riverboat cruising. Relax with a cocktail in the lobby or enjoy a drink after a rooftop swim in the summertime. To keep your workout routine on the road, book a fitness room with an in-room equipment or visit the fitness center. Guys, if you're traveling to Chicago for Real Madrid's preseason tour, look no further than DoubleTree by Hilton Chicago Magnificent Mile. Coming up is a segment taken from one of the members-only episodes we've done this week. I lost track. We're doing it every day. If you're not a member, you're missing out big time. Go to patreon.com/managingmadrid, where we are extremely active, putting out bonus content for our members. If you're not on Patreon or you're on YouTube, you can simply hit join on my YouTube video or go to the YouTube memberships tab and join it that way. It's the same content. It's totally up to you which one you want to join. You don't have to join both, just one of them, and you'll get a ton of bonus content. In the full episode, which is linked in the show notes, we talked about what the advanced analytics say about La Liga's top two, Real Madrid and Barcelona. We talk about Haaland in Manchester City versus Haaland in Borussia Dortmund. What are the differences? What changed? Why did it change? We also talk about where Kroos ranks among all-time passers and midfielders, and more. Full episode is in the show notes. This segment is about Mbappe and just Real Madrid's player squad management as a whole in the past 10 years and moving forward. We're in an excellent spot. We are in an excellent spot, and Sid and I discussed that. Enjoy it. Let's get to it. You remember when we were talking about, I think this was the podcast with me, you, and Lucas, if I'm not mistaken, on Friday, where we were talking about Matt's article from the beginning of the season and how Matt was optimistic in that, we could piece it together. We can piece it together without Benzema because Jude and Rodrigo and Vinicius can break lines and create havoc. And between them, you create enough chances that eventually you'll get enough goals, even though you don't have the cold-blooded finisher. And you mentioned that you were optimistic, but not as quite as optimistic as Matt. I'd probably lean towards where you were. And I remember writing about this, I think around Christmas time. And I actually still feel this way, by the way. I don't think my opinion on it has changed much despite our successful season. I said it then. I said at the beginning of the year. I said it midway through the season. I'm going to say it now. I think this is a really good team, as is. Forget Mbappe next season. I think as is, it's a really good team. But it's a team that doesn't have a massive, massive margin of error. Because I think if you add that cold-blooded finisher, the team gets to another level. What I'm saying is only in theory, and it sounds a bit crazy, but I think it's true. I think if you add that missing piece of like an Mbappe, you go to another level this season, where if you're relying on just outperforming your XG this season or scraping by wins or getting 4 draws in a row in the Champions League, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we only had 1 win in the 6 knockout games, right? In the Champions League? No, 2. We beat Leipzig once and Bayern once. Sorry, we beat Leipzig and Bayern once each, but we drew the other games. I just think your margin of error increases with a player like him, is my point. And I think if we're looking at outperforming our XG next season, it's going to be even more next season.
Yeah. That was what it was, and we had no margin for error for sure. And the moments when we teams kind of took advantage of that, like Bayern, we were still able to push over the edge because it felt like no team could really do much once they went 1 goal up on us. They couldn't go 2 goals up that easily. It was really hard to go from +1 to +2 against us. And at 1 goal up against us, we could always stay dominating games. But yeah, at 0-0, we just didn't play so well. Our midfield didn't control games as well as we remembered at 0-0 at all. Or as well as the results look, I should say. we had probably like weeks where we'd win 3, 4 games in a row, 3, 4 weeks in a row, and maybe not play well for the vast majority of those games. But the last 20 minutes where we had to get the goal, we would be right there on point. Our subs would be fresher than the rest, and in that sense, it's a very shocking 95-point season. I think it might be the most we've overperformed XG in our whole time as Real Madrid fans. I think that's what I'm trying to get at, to be honest. Like, and we're used to this, but this is bigger than what we're used to, is what I'm trying to say. And again, that's where it comes down to the model. If you go off like what Matt said and Matt's framing, it makes complete sense too. Like, they had the best dribblers, they created 78 XG, they won. And if you watch it, you could convince yourself of that. But I do think the reality is closer to what the stats bomb model has said, like you said. Smaller for margin for error. It was a 95-point season that could have easily been an 85-point season if things had bounced a little differently. Whereas next season, if we finish with 95, our floor is still probably 88, 90 with Mbappe. We probably don't finish below 88, 90 going forward that easily. And that's what I'm looking forward to. And I think that's where, when I talk to some other fans of other clubs, they're just like, like, were you guys really that great this year? Like, and I'm like, no, we weren't great. And that's what's funny, because we were in a transition year and we still won all this when we weren't like truly a great team. We were just still so good. We still had like our transition year is still one with all these great midfielders where we go ahead and win the double. And fans should be really grateful. 2 years ago, we should be grateful because it's a lot like 2 years ago, except our midfield's a lot younger, but we're still in transition. We haven't fully replaced the pieces that left, like Benzema. And yeah, I mean, it's just so funny. Like, if you told me like at the start of that 21-22 season, you're gonna get 2 Champions Leagues in 3 years, and each of these seasons you're gonna be upset you don't have Mbappe, and it's just not something that happens to teams in transition years. Like, what's a good example? It's like when Chelsea won in 2021. It could have been a platform for them to keep going, and like, it's very rare for a team to reach the final in a transition year. Chelsea 2021 is the best example, and again, they didn't have this like platform where they keep it going from it. But almost every other team is really good. Like 2019, Tottenham reached the final in a transition year for them, in that like Kane was hurt and they needed new midfielders. It wasn't going to work under Pochettino if they kept going, and that team was very much like stitched together. What else? Like 2013, that was a pretty apex Dortmund. I wouldn't call that like a transition season. Most of the teams that reached the finals in between those years, like the 2014 teams, were all peak teams. 2015 were all peak Juve, Barca, peak Real Atleti, peak Juve again, peak like Liverpool. 2018 might be one of the closer examples, because when they reached the final, like, that was with Lloris Karius in goal before they had Alisson in goal. Van Dijk had just started playing for 6 months. That might be the closest vibe, because when they reached that final, that was the weakest Liverpool was going to be for years. And they had, like, their goalie was screwing up a lot of their box defending that year. Like, he was making silly mistakes. But even before he had a concussion, the final, you could mark that down to the concussion. So that's a good example, I would say. But we're still in a better place than them. And I would argue, like, that year, they had Salah. Like, we have Vinny, but they had the Salah, Firmino, Mane front three. They had like that foundation. We're like, we had Joselu and Jude, but we're waiting on Mbappe, so it's just still a little different for us.
Well,
But
this is what to me has been what's been so impressive about this run. And by run, I literally mean like close to a 15-year run. But let's go back a decade, because that's when we really started to become successful in the Champions League. Before, we were getting really good results and kind of failing at the semifinal hurdle under Jose Mourinho. But let's take it back to 2014. We won one, took a break. We won 3 in a row. Then we took what, a 1 year, 2 year, I guess we took like a 4-year break, won another one. That should add up to 5 somewhere. I hope it does. If not, if you get what I mean. When we won the 2022 one, at no point, like, if you win like 5 in the span of like 8 years, it's the fifth one. You're usually like, okay, this is the end of a dynasty. This is the end of a cycle. This is Steph Curry's last ring. He put a bow tie on it, cemented his legacy because he did it in a very difficult year. Well, we're not talking that way. We're talking about like this is the beginning somehow. That is so hard to do. That mean that just goes back to the greatness of the management and the board. This is kind of like the Spurs, where they had 20 years where there was no end in sight. They were good with Robinson. They lucked out, got Tim Duncan with a freak draft. They had the Twin Towers then for a few years. Then they were just amazing with Manu and Parker. Then they got Kawhi out of nowhere. Kawhi like took the mantle, was a Finals MVP. Then of course after he left, it all went to shit. But that was a solid 20 years. That was so rare. This kind of reminds me of that. Maybe we're like halfway through it.
It's just
But
even better in some ways because we replaced Benzema. I think in this run, like Benzema was on the 2022 team. He's not here, and now Kroos leaving means if we do it again in the next 2 years, each of those teams loses like one of those Duncan, Parker, Ginobili's or the Tom Brady, Belichick. Like we're actively moving on from them. Like like the Spurs, yeah, they had their Kawhi Leonard, that 2014, 2013, those finals. But I mean, they didn't go back after that. This feels like if the Warriors came back this year and like their young guys worked out, that's what it feels like for us. And like if they'd like phased Clay out of the team, or Benzema was better than Clay, if they'd phased Draymond out of the team or something, and they made the finals again, or like they had a new guy, I don't think we've seen something like this because with Cruz gone, we make one more final. Let's just assume, maybe we make it next year, but let's just say 2 years from now, and Modric has been phased out more. That's a completely different team than 2022 at that point. It's like, it's almost, I mean, and that's where I mean, like, it's like we're winning during the down years. Like when the Spurs have a down year where they realize, like, okay, like we need to kind of wait it out. Some of the young guys need to get better. We need to, and kind of take on more responsibility. Those are the years we're winning in my opinion. I don't think we've seen anything like this. Like, I just going back before Liverpool, Chelsea. What's the other teams that are young in transition that have kind of won a final? You could maybe say like it's like Pep's first Barcelona team, 2009, where so many of the guys were young. You knew they'd be back.
the thing is, like, even if you think of examples like that, they obviously fizzled out and not didn't amount to what we thought they were going to with that youth because we can barely remember them while they were like one-off years. Like you remember Ajax that year, 2019, where I mean, eventually they just lost players, but they obviously just couldn't run it back, and they amounted to very little, and now they're in a terrible state. But like I don't know, I'm just kind of at a loss because in football it's different in that some of the younger up and coming teams, if they're not big teams, they get picked apart and they lose all their good players and then it's over. And big teams usually just have established players who we're a very unique situation right now where like you think back, like I know a lot of people on this call right now have been Real Madrid fans for a long time. In some of our past loaded superstar years, they weren't young teams. Zidane was what 29, 30 when we signed him. Figo was at the tail end of his career. Ronaldo Nazario post surgery. We got him. You know, this our stars are so young right now. It's what makes this situation very unique and strategic and brilliant. And we're very fortunate to be in this situation.